Good morning, everyone. Please take a seat. Hi. Um, my name is Tushar Patel. I'm a Canada Research Chair in Biophysics and Associate Dean at the University of Lethbridge. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you this morning here. I want to acknowledge that the University of Lethbridge's indigenous name is Iniskim, meaning Sacred Buffalo Stone, and we are located at the traditional Blackfoot Territory Confederacy. I'm very excited to announce this morning that we have very interesting and interactive panel this morning organized by Clean Resource Innovation Network. And we're going to discuss interactively with all of you Canada's oil and gas energy innovation ecosystem. This is a topic close to us because, as I said, I come from Alberta and we do have oil-based economy. So we really want to make sure that we have that balance between the economy and the environment. With that, stage is yours.
Thank you, and for that kind introduction. And we are thrilled to be here this morning. I'll give a quick introduction of myself, and then the panelists will introduce themselves. I'm Joy Romero. I am the volunteer president of CRIN. And what I hope you hear and understand is that CRIN works because we all come together and work inside of it. And we do have a small staff that supports us, but it's because of the way that people come together for a purpose and drive things that actually makes it work. And so my other job that isn't volunteer is I'm executive advisor of innovation for Canadian Natural Resources Limited. I have been with Canadian Natural for over 22 years. I joined them to develop the Horizon Oil Sands project. Before that, I was in southeastern BC with Teck Corporation, in Labrador, in iron ore, in the Netherlands, in steel production. I'm a metallurgical engineer. So that's a little bit about me, and where I play in the oil and gas space is collaboration for innovation, and have done that actually in all of the companies that I've been in. But now it is, I would say, pretty much my primary focus. So, Andrea.
Thank you, Joy. My name's Andrea Crook, and I am the CEO of OptiSize. We are a small technology company focused on low-carbon solutions for imaging the subsurface. I began my career in oil and gas as a geophysicist at Shell Canada and worked for some small consulting companies as well before starting OptiSize in 2011. And I'm also on the board of directors for CRIN, and our company was one of the companies that received funding for our research project in reducing the land footprint of seismic exploration through one of the CRIN technology competitions.
I'm Catherine Bérubé. I'm a VP at Cycle Capital. So Cycle is Canada's leading climate tech VC, and amongst the sectors we invest in, there's definitely the energy sector. And so we have 6 funds under management, 600 million as well. We have an accelerator, Cycle Momentum, and we receive more or less 1,200 deals on a yearly basis. And so what that means is at the end of the year, we're really selective at picking and choosing the deals we're doing, specifically in the energy sector. So we'll end up investing in 2 to 3 deals yearly and Series B deals. So we're looking at 5 to 20 million investments in 20 to hundreds of millions round of investments. We always invest alongside other investors and syndicates. And so that's more or less what we're doing. Major part and where we're here is we definitely believe energy is super important. It's actually, when looking at the past 12 years of investing in climate tech in Canada, it's the strongest, the most dynamic sector, both in terms of, innovation production, but also in terms of investments being attracted. So we believe in that sector. We've invested in pretty CapEx intensive deals, so we're not scared of that. We want to keep on doing it as well. And yes, we're looking for collaboration, and that's why I'm also on the board of CRIN.
Hi, everyone. I'm Drew Labour, and I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for Energy Efficiency and Technology at Natural Resources Canada. And so I guess I'm here also wearing a federal government hat and maybe government hat generally, because we are a really important part of the CRIN network. In terms of the span of my role at NRCan, as the name implies, we do a lot of energy RD&D work, both on the programmatic side, so grant and contributions programs, funding, earlier stage, like TRLs 5 through 9, energy technologies. I also have a series of federal energy laboratories across the country, and then also do programming on energy efficiency, so things like the Greener Homes retrofit program, or development of a Canadian green building strategy and ISO 50001, those sorts of activities. But my primary linkage to CRIN has been through the labs and our RD&D work, and we have found them to be a really invaluable partner over the last few years.
So thank you. And all of these people are part of the sectors and groups that come together to drive innovation in CRIN. And so I'm going to just give you a quick overview of what CRIN is. And, if you're not already a CRIN member, certainly hoping that by the time we're done that you will be. So Clean Resource Innovation Network, you can go in. There is no charge to join. It is a volunteer group. So hopefully by the time we're done, we have about 50 new members in CRIN if you're not already one. So Clean Resource Innovation Network, this is what I will share with you today. All of us here together with you. I mean, that's why CRIN works. It's us together. So the vision for CRIN is that Canada is a global leader in clean hydrocarbons from source to end use. And really what CRIN is about is finding those solutions. What is the solutions? What are the technical things and the innovation that needs to take place? So this is a true statement. And what's really important is from source, so that's production, to end use is the application. And so what I want you to think about is, regardless of the sector that you're involved in and that you're tied to in your research or in your daily job, is that our country is on its journey to net zero. So that means all of us need to get there, all sectors. And what I hope you will see is the deep investment in getting to net zero in our industry, about how transferable those solutions are to every sector. And so, on our journey, it's really our journey as Canadians. And what we want to make sure is that those solutions are available for everyone, and that we also have that input from everyone. So who shows up and what are the sectors? Well, obviously, the oil and gas industry. We are absolutely looking for these solutions on our journey to net zero, but we can't do that alone. And the other thing that we realized is that the sectors are actually much larger than the traditional industry, government, and academia. If you really want to bring something through to commercialization, important. But what's equally important is the widespread adoption. And so not only a widespread adoption inside of our industry, but across all sectors and globally. Because, and I was listening in this morning on the previous panel, if you want our Canadian entrepreneurs to stay Canadian entrepreneurs, this lovely lady here and her endeavors, we actually need to provide that fulsome markets and reason to be here. So right through to the development, but then into the adoption phase as well, and that needs to be supported. And so that's the whole idea of the network, is that inside of the network, you can find who you need to be able to find to get your job done in a day. So this is about you. This is, who do you need to be able to find to get your job done in a day? And hopefully That network, the network that we formed, which is, as of last night, was 3,526 people, that person who, that thing that you need today that's in your too hard pile, you can find them in the network to get your job done. Or otherwise, it's not useful, right? So my job is to have the solutions so that Canada is the global leader in clean hydrocarbons from source to end use. Everybody who comes to this has a different value proposition. And that's what you're going to hear some about in the individuals that we have here. And I want you to think that about you. So wherever, your sector is inside of this and where you play, the value proposition for CRIN for you is different. And that's fine. That's exactly what it should be, because the ecosystem is large. So what we did first as industry is the transparency. We are so fortunate in this country. Privileged in my job to work with many, if not most, of the post-secondary institutions and the research institutions across our country. So I have the privilege of being in many. Several years ago, if I were to go across the country, I would potentially find many people doing, if not the exact same thing, very similar work, but very disconnected and siloed. And what we try to do inside of CRIN is pull together as industry. And CRIN is all oil and gas, conventional oil and gas, unconventional, oil sands, offshore. It's the whole gamut. And when you know that R&D is taking place across the entire country, which is awesome. We are so blessed to have such focus for solutions across our country. But what we needed to create was the focus on where our gaps were and where our needs were, and to be very transparent of what they are. So that's the 7 theme areas that we have inside of CRIN. And while a number of them are based on greenhouse gas reduction, you will notice, like Andrea, that's land footprint. We've not lost sight of the other aspects. So our areas are digital oil and gas. That's platform across everything. There is nothing that we do in the industry that doesn't have a digital component associated with it. Methane's emissions monitoring, quantification, and abatement. So important, standalone, really, really necessary. What you can't measure, what you're not monitoring, you can't control. What we've done in this space, actually Canada now leads, which is tremendous. We are working with the US as they are now trying to catch up, and we're involved with the UN. And we are, of course, with the national programs with Drew. So this is tremendous, the work that we've done in a very short period of time and the actual real reductions inside of our operations. Novel hydrocarbon extractions. How do we remove without creating a footprint, without greenhouse gas emissions in the first place? Smaller land footprint, reducing water. So really important that we know and learn how to do this better. Low carbon intensity alternatives and fuels, biofuels, the whole spectrum. Everything is there. It needs to be a part of the picture. Water technology development. We have not lost sight of that. That's super important. Obviously, the land and well site reclamation aspect is really important. This is where you pull in the use of that land of solar or geothermal or different aspects and ways to reclaim. And low emissions value added products. So innovative products from hydrocarbons themselves, other things other than combustible fuels. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage, hydrogen and geothermal. So we're looking at the whole picture, the full energy systems, everything that's involved to get us to net zero, not losing sight of land and water. But what's really, really important in that is that to do that, the sectors that are involved are our youth. So student energy, 40,000 strong around the world, are a part of CRIN. We have another group of young professionals, so literally across all industries, to pull them together to make sure that they understand, again, our youth, what are the opportunities? If you want to make a difference and you want to help our country get to net zero, we need this brain power. We need your energy. I need to retire someday. So, super, super, super important. Obviously, we need the solution providers, regardless of where they come, the entrepreneurs, all of the research institutions. And people need to be able to understand what their others are doing, and hence the linkages that are in there. We cannot do it without the financial community. And I think that that's something that's been missed when we pulled these groups together in the past. Catherine and several others, we're so fortunate we actually have pulled together the teams at sectors of everything from angel investors through to large caps. So regardless of where you're at, remember, we want to take you all the way through to commercialization and widespread adoption. So we need the different financial mechanisms that are required to take somebody across that entire journey. Obviously, when Drew sits here, he sits here on two. He's a funder as well as a technology provider. So we need all levels of government. So we have federal, provincial, we have the regulators, we have the municipal governments. And so the actual municipalities, we want their garage entrepreneurs to understand what our issues are. And, obviously producers, but end users. So aviation, ag, Canadian manufacturers and exporters, cement, the power producers. The technologies that we and you've heard that we lead 75% of the investment in Canada for clean tech is oil and gas, and we're the largest adopter. So I'm really looking forward when that becomes more level playing field, and net zero drives that. Other industries will need to have that same kind of drive. But right now, we're happy to share. And we want to be linked in because we want the solutions that they're finding that are unique to ours to come to us as well. So really super important that end users are a part of this. And of course, there are more. And of the social innovation aspect, unless these things are socially acceptable and that people believe that this is possible, you don't have that permission to go in that direction either. So it's really important that all sectors come together to understand what's possible. So we do have a polling question for you. Our first polling question is, what sector best describes you and the work that you do? So if you can participate, that would be awesome. We'd love to see what's here in the room. Thank you. Yay for volunteers. You definitely need to be a CRIB member if you aren't already. So obviously a lot of government, technology developers, awesome. Academia and researchers. By the way, past life, I was chair of Athabasca University. I advise on a number of science councils and dean circles, and with U of C, Athabasca still, but on the business side with Athabasca, science with U of C, and I was a member of the Science and Innovation Council for Canada as well. So I really like you guys. Okay, so even here, look at the diversity that's here. And I think that that's a really super important message. It's the diversity of the groups that come together that make sure that these things actually move forward. And without that diversity, we don't have the whole fulsome development, nor the acceleration that's required. So thank you, number one, for being here. Oops, how did I? Okay, thank you. So what have we done as CREN? We were very fortunate to be the receptors of $100 million from the Strategic Innovation Fund from the Government of Canada. And of that, we have been conducting competitions and awards where we work outside of the main competition was TRL 6 to 9. Again, remember, to commercialization, widespread adoption. when we did this, that was a real gap area to try and get through. And also we just want to get those things on the other side and get them into our operations. So super, super important. We did one on digital oil and gas, 5 million. Awards were between 500,000 and $1 million per project. Low emissions, fuels, products, technology competitions, 30 million there and another 45 million to reducing environmental footprint. So what was super exciting with that is we received 137 different applications. And what's unique is every single one of those was a producer and a technology provider. So I think what I'm hoping you're hearing is that pull. We always want to make sure that that pull is there to make sure that these things go through commercialization and widespread adoption. That was awarded 27 projects, and for that, calculated by government standard calculations, accumulated over 10 years, 119 megatons of CO2 equivalent is the benefit of that $80 million spend. Its leverage is $290 million total project spend in that space. So also fresh water usage, reduction by about 75% intensity, and the same thing for land. So these are really important for us. And I think, good value for those monies spent. So how can you participate in CRIN? Again, it's the Clean Resource Innovation Network. It's free to join. It is about getting your job done. We have a overall LinkedIn network. We use the simplest tools to make sure they're accessible to everybody. And each of the theme areas have their own closed LinkedIn group in which you can hop in and say, hey, I'm looking for X. Can somebody please help me? And I can tell you the engineers in our company use that all the time. So we absolutely use CRIN for R2 hard pile, and really, really, really important. So after that, we will now move into asking enough of me. I'm not actually, often I'm normally the panelist. This is one of my few moderator things, so you need to get, I'm learning. You're never too old to learn. All right, so how does CRIN help you and your sector play a role in the path towards net zero? So, Andrea.
Okay, so I'm going to start off telling you very shortly how we've benefited, and that was that we're one of those 27 projects, and we received $3.2 million to develop our technology. But there's a bit of a story to that. When we started our company, we were primarily consulting to larger oil and gas clients and helping them adopt new technologies in their company and different innovations, and helping bring some of this technology into Canada because we were familiar with it from other places in the world. We were developing some of our own internal software, and we had ideas for research, but we were limited in what we could accomplish by both time and funds. And then in 2020, everything changed, and a lot of clients had to cancel their projects, and we could either lay off our staff or finally dig into that research we always wanted to do. We were just lacking in funds. So at that point, we accessed some federal and provincial funding through Alberta Innovates and IRAP, the Industrial Research Assistance Program, as well as an industry partner called COSIA, which is Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. That allowed us to do the initial research on how to reduce the land footprint of these exploration programs. Now, primarily for oil and gas, but they also apply to carbon capture, geothermal, and other clean tech areas. Through that research, we found that the technology, we went from a technology readiness level of 3 to 6, and the technology worked, but we needed to go to the field to test it operationally. And to do operational tests, it's not thousands of dollars we need, but millions. And that's where CRIN came in. It was a very competitive process, and it took a while to go through everything, but this March we secured 50% of the funding for our project from CRIN, and then we also received additional funding from Alberta Innovates, IRAP, and some of the oil companies. So we're actually in the middle of acquiring the data. We are expecting that it will reduce the land footprint of imaging the subsurface by 50% or higher. We're also tracking all the emissions and doing the emissions calculations, because by going to this lower impact technology, we may be able to reduce the emissions even more than 50%. So we're quite excited about this, and we're very grateful to CRIN for the funding.
So Cycle is amongst the investments we've made, and we were an early investor in one of the company called Enercam. That's pretty amongst the big, let's say, tech player in the sector. And so back then we didn't have CRIN. So yeah, Enercam team ended up finding funding to de-risk and build a demo plant in Westbury near Sherbrooke. So that's always really challenging for CapEx intensive deals to find the funding to build plants. We're not in SaaS type of technologies where you get a bunch of people in front of computers. That's a different sector, and that's always really challenging to do those deals in the VC space, because that's different. It doesn't always fit the maths. So we definitely need for energy sectors such initiatives like that. And so Enercam, moving on a few years later, ended up also receiving funding as part of CRIN. And so just to give you a sense of how much money that's needed, it's more or less, we conducted a study a few years back, but I'm pretty sure the maths are still more or less the same. So with SDTC, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and what we found was we need to work on making sure that our companies have IP. So that's like specific programs are working on that front, but making sure that companies have enough capital to compete with their American competition. And what we found was that more or less the companies had 50% of the capital needed. And so that's really critical to make sure that we have that funding and we have enough companies at this stage with de-risked technologies. Because if it doesn't happen at that very specific stage, commercialization, that's where we tend to lose some of our late stage players. And that's super critical because that's where, big VCs will put a hand on the company. And so not having enough capital in the company, Canadian capital, that's exactly where we lose ownership of your company. So what if we intend to do is build a, clean tech economy in Canada, that's where we need to work on. And so that means bringing more companies to that late stage. And that's where CRIN is playing.
Great. From our perspective, putting on my federal hat, we saw the value in what CRIN was offering, I guess, from the moment we decided to put the $100 million investment into it. My colleagues over at the Department of the ICE through SIF. This is important because what happens with the oil and gas sector will be one of the chief determinants for the success or failure of Canada's climate ambitions. And so we place some pretty high expectations on this sector. 75% methane reduction by the end of the decade, 40% reduction across oil and gas by the end of the decade. Those are just a couple of those expectations. And frankly, we need the industry's help to get there. And CRIN really catalyzed or became a kind of emblem of the industry's effort to come together to tackle these problems in a consistent way, in a coherent way, because there were a lot of efforts shooting off in lots of directions that kind of needed to be corralled. Putting on my Enercan hat, specifically, I mentioned at the outset some of the reasons why we like working with CRIN. We like the fact that there is a kind of coming together this network of networks concept is very useful for us as well, because we also have at times within the federal family lots of things going on, and having a focal point that we can say, have you talked to Corinne, has been incredibly useful. But the other, maybe most important thing for my staff are, it has created this avenue to have these discussions where we can share lessons learned, best practices. We can do show and tell sessions about what my labs are working on, and maybe what various companies or universities or others are working on in a similar space, to make it a more efficient process. Because as much as the effort is going to be heavy, any wasted moment of duplication or going off in opposite directions is going to set us back in that really ambitious target of where we want to be by 2030.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, and as a producer, this is the space that helps us find questions. So what happens is, each of the groups that I shared with you, they are hosting webinars on a continuous basis as to what are the opportunities inside of that webinar. What are our issues? We have a series going on now called Money Talks. And, in that again, and each one is focused on different components. Catherine has already been a part of that. And this will continue as long as there are groups that want to come together. So it generates what the membership tells us they want and need, and what they would like to share. And so if you have an event like this inside of the CRIN network, it was advertised to the group to bring, and everything, it is a virtual network. So we sometimes have physical events. It is always virtual. Because if you look at the people that we're trying to reach, even in the oil and gas industry, they are dispersed literally across the entire country from coast to coast to coast, that are trying to find solutions. And it's the same thing with, if we did another poll that said, where are you from? My guess is we go coast to coast to coast here. So what's really important in Canada is we don't have any one location, that you have the physical density and the intellectual density, entrepreneurial density, to actually solve these things in one place. We need to come together as a country. So that's why the virtual network of networks component. And so any session, like this one is being recorded, this will probably be on the CRIN network as well. And you can actually, so if you missed all of the Money Talk sessions, and there's one that's really important to you, you can go find that. If you missed a webinar on X technology or whatever, you can go find that. And also we feature Andrea's technologies and those, other 100 that came. There's a little short video on the network connection of these technologies, so you can actually, what is available. And so we're just trying to grow the network constantly, or what are the things, what are the tools inside of there that help you get what you need. So poll 2 question, based on the discussion, which of the following would you like to know more about regarding the oil and gas sector's contribution towards net zero? So we can take a minute with that. And then, of course, what this will drive for us is, what are we going to do? And to help you learn that more, because hopefully you're members. And this is what you need. The energy sector challenges. Perfect. So the energy sector challenges in each of those theme areas are listed. And what we're doing right now is updating them. And you can hop into that theme area and actually find that. And if you are a researcher, what we want you to be able to do is actually connect to that end, to somebody who's trying to create that poll. And, you actually connect the two individuals. We don't want that when you're finished your research. We want that as you're conducting your research. If you're developing a new technology, an entrepreneur as Andrea, we want you to have that connection early. We don't want you to miss the mark, because as Drew said, we don't have time. So excellent. Good. I'm glad we're providing that. Yes. And we will make sure that we pay attention to the rest of this as well. So thank you for your input. So a growing number of climate-related regulations are with us, and this is obviously a policy conversation as well here. Programs and policies are being implemented across in Canada. To our panelists, which of these are creating challenges and opportunities for your sector? So, Andrea, would you mind to share?
I'll start by talking to the opportunities. Because of changing federal and provincial regulations, for example, in Alberta with protection for caribou habitat, there was a push in industry to reduce our land footprint. So this led to multiple different challenges. We participated in the Imperial Clean Tech Challenge in early 2020. There was the COSIA, Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance Land Footprint Challenge, and then later on the CRIN Challenge. So by industry putting forward these challenges, which are driven by government policy, innovators can come forward and say, well, we have a potential solution. And then industry is able to see many different types of potential solutions and can move forward with them. So that's a success when we have clear regulations. What we're seeing in the carbon capture space in particular is companies are ready to jump in and provide solutions, but there's a lot of uncertainty around the regulations. And because of this, the innovators are sitting there waiting, and we're small, so we can't wait forever as we have limited funds. And the larger companies are uncertain what direction they should be going in. So I really think that we need very clear policy on in the carbon capture space and also in the mining space as our technology applies to mineral exploration as well, particularly for critical minerals. So I don't have an answer on the policies, as I'm a small company, but that's what we're seeing.
Thank you, Andrea.
I'll have a broader answer given that we're investing in different subsectors. But I think what's really important and critical is having both the baton and the carrot, the stick and the carrot, to make sure that that's not strictly, innovation push, but also, industry pull. And so what we've seen in the past is that even though you end up creating a business that's in the biofuel sector, if you don't have the fiscal measures, it just means that you'll be producing it locally, but you're just selling it elsewhere because that makes more sense to sell it elsewhere. So if we want to have both the production, but also, make sure that it's being consumed locally, in order to reduce our GHGs, we need to think this through the whole chain. In terms of funding, there's definitely, carbon market puts a lot of pressure, and that's across the whole sector. So pressure is good. It, creates or encourage innovation. So that's good from an investment point of view. And more, the different grant providers, such as ETCs, that's super, that's a very, very desperately needed organization that we need to keep on supporting. That because I know maybe some of you have gone through the process of SDTC. I'm seeing some smiles, so I'm guessing that's yeah, it's challenging, but that's also some kind of seal of approval from an investment perspective. So that's I think you need to go through it. So one good thing, and that's also making sure that the technologies have the potential to reduce GHG as well. So that's also things that from a VC standpoint, that's needed because unfortunately we have limited resource to do those assessments, specifically at the earlier stage where we're not investing, but some are. And so that collaboration with SDTC, that's also created a early stage fund, seed fund, is super appreciated in the industry. And You know, as part of the pandemic, both BDC and EDC came up with matching programs. And that, I think that was super effective at deploying capital in the market at a very needed time for companies to keep on scaling. And what was good is there's a trust that's been built between the private investors and public investors to align capital and make sure capital flows while the industry see a potential. So that was fast. It created a lot of great collaborations with BDC and EDC. And from a VC point of view, I mean, all the VICI, the Venture Capital Catalyst Initiative, is also super needed. And from an innovation standpoint, super important, because it means that we have large enough VC with Canadian ownership, to invest in Canadian companies. So again, back to when I said if we want to create an industry, innovative industry based on climate technologies, we need large enough investors to maintain that Canadian ownership. That's it.
I'll probably tackle this one from a slightly different angle because my sector, the public sector, is the source, the font of many of these growing number of climate-related regulations, programs, and policies. But I do want to spend a minute on that growing number issue. In the 1990s, there was a handful of public servants in federal government, provincial governments that were talking, thinking, and doing something about climate change. And that trajectory has obviously shifted drastically in the last 25 years. And the result of that is that there are a growing number of players in the federal family, to use our example, that are doing climate change. It is mainstream now. It is actually part of every organization's work stream in a way that it wasn't even a few years ago. And that's needed. I mean, climate change is everybody's business. Every department, every part of every department is now thinking about climate change, whether they did 5, 10, 15 years ago or not. For those departments like mine and ECCC and a few others around the federal family that have been doing it since those early years, it can get pretty complicated. And so I hope people have seen over the last few years that the federal government has been trying to pull itself together to coordinate a little bit more, to make sure that it is not 17 different places you have to go if you want to talk about federal programs. So we have things like the Clean Growth Hub that provide a kind of concierge service for companies looking to access federal RD&D programming. We just frankly meet more often. We have more shared governance across some of our programs, obvious handoff points between funding streams, so that if one place doesn't work, someone else can take up the slack. And I guess the interface with CRIN is really important here because, as I alluded to, as we come together, as multiple funding and policy and regulatory agencies come together to try and collaborate and coordinate amongst themselves, it's good to have a counterpart on the industry and other stakeholder side that can play that role too, so that we also on our own hand don't have to go and talk to 31 different players. We can kind of do it through a central channel. So I do think that is kind of how we're responding to the reality that there are more things going on in this climate-related space.
Thank you. And for us, we're really grateful as industry, I'm going to put that hat on, for the measures that have come forward. And I think, when you look at the ICT credits right now, and it's not just oil and gas, it's all forms of energy that have the potential to, help us as a country get to our energy systems, our energy use, production, and to get to net zero. And so that's super, super important that we also look at it in the policies are system driven is really super important. When we look at the stability, reliability, and affordable energy as we go forward, these are the policies that need to support those systems as we go forward and look at it cohesively and integrated. And so, that's what we look for in this, is that we all have a place and that we're all competitive. And so with the Canada Growth Fund, of course, that's another aspect that that brings that in. And so, yeah, I mean, this is what's allowing us to move forward. I'm sure I don't live here, but I turned the news on this morning and the Pathways commercials have hit the airways. And, I actually lead the technology innovation stream for Pathways. And it is super important. I mean, the first phases of Pathways are being supported. Again, we talked about the policies supporting, widespread adoption. And because it's not just a commercialization, they need to get to the widespread adoption. And that's what you're seeing both at the federal and provincial level, is to support the widespread adoption across all industries to get us to net zero. And, as it happens. And then, of course, there's the technology development side. And right now, we've committed $24.1 billion in that space as an industry for the adoption and the technology development just over the next few years. So really, really important that this is, it's a team sport. And we need the policies to be able to support us in that team sport at a federal, provincial, and in industry level. So really, really grateful for that. So that being said, we have a third poll question. So just as we go into our question and answers here, and that is, based on this discussion, are incoming policies and regulations helping the Canadian oil and gas industry to contribute to Canada's net zero goals? And we'd like to understand your thoughts on that. So we hope that, wherever you fall on this spectrum here, that this will drive some of your questions for the team. And we're here and excited to spend the session here time with you. So please.
Hello, my name is John Holdren. I'm a professor at Harvard University. I lead projects on energy technology innovation for the climate change challenge and pathways to net zero for a number of countries. For 8 years during the Obama administration, I was the chief science advisor to President Obama, with a lot of responsibilities in the area of climate science and technology, energy science and technology, and so on. And I have a question for everybody on the panel. And the question is the extent to which CRIN as an organization and all of your individual affiliations are actively supporting carbon capture, sequestration, and utilization. I've heard it mentioned once, briefly in the conversation so far. In my view, it is the 800-pound gorilla in the fossil fuel space. Without it, we're not going to get to net zero. Be very interested to learn what folks on the panel are thinking and doing about carbon capture and sequestration.
Where would you like to start? I mean, obviously I can fill in a chunk, but we'll let you guys go and then I'll take the back end.
We've seen a number of deals in that space, still immature. So from our perspective, so investing in Series B again, we're seeing a growing number of opportunities, which is interesting. Challenge with VCs always, how do you fund these technologies? The ones that are super capex intensive need some specific programs. And so with the new program that was just launched by the federal government, I could see, deals emerging from the ones we've seen. We have invested in a biomass torrefaction deal that does sequestration. And so we're also looking at building out of that company, which already has a commercial plant, building a number of them in collaboration with with a strategic player in the oil and gas space. So we have one deal so far, but we see lots of deals, investment opportunities coming through?
Yeah, this is a great question for me because we are actually in the midst right now of the Department of Natural Resources across the federal family is in the process of developing a CCUS carbon management strategy for the country. We have been in Canada and continue to be leaders in this space with some of the world's first projects. We do have about 5 of the world's 25 biggest projects right now. NRCan has been on the ground floor of every project going all the way back to Weyburn-Midale, which started in 2000 as the world's first and longest standing international CCUS project, bringing up CO2 from the Dakotas up into southern Saskatchewan. But since then, ShellQuest, the Carbon Trunk Line, and Boundary Dam have all been projects that we've been working on. More recently, at the federal level within Canada, we've introduced an investment tax credit, or will be introducing an investment tax credit in the coming months for 2023, which will allow for up to 60% of expenditures that go towards capture and sequester and storage, permanent storage. To qualify, in the federal budget a couple of years ago, we introduced $319 million towards CCUS RD&D. That's being delivered through my department, some of which is going to federal labs and institutions, but much of which is also going to grant contribution programming to earlier stage RD&D. So we just completed a FEED study call. We're in the midst of doing one around carbon capture. There's one coming on storage and on storage in the coming weeks. And so it is a very active space. That's just the stuff that we're doing at NRCan. But beyond that, we've got the Canadian Infrastructure Bank that is starting to dip its toes into CCUS projects. The CIF Net Zero Accelerator Program at ICID is also making some major investments in CCUS projects. What I would say more generally about CCUS for Canada is that we will rely on CCUS to a greater extent than most countries in the world. This is for multiple reasons. Some of it is our industrial base, where we have a heavy industry base. But the other thing that has to be mentioned is we have some of the world's best pore space. And so, I don't think I'm overstating it to say that as we start getting into the 2030s and 40s, as the world realizes that every misstep on mitigation requires a greater requirement for carbon removal, the value of that pore space that we see across the country, but very centered in particular parts of the country at the moment, is going to become ever more and more valuable. So my colleagues in the Alberta government, I think, have had the foresight to realize that. They brought in a new pore space regime that really is treating pore space as a natural resource in its own right, so that it's governed on behalf of Albertans and treated like something that will provide value for generations to come. And I do think that is setting a very high bar for other jurisdictions around the world to think in the same way.
So, sorry, Andrea, my apologies.
I'd like to speak to the pore space because as a technology developer, that's where we are very, very active. And we do have a lot of reservoirs in Alberta for that specific purpose. We have to be able to keep the carbon in the ground and monitor it. And that's where companies such as ours and other companies of complementary technology come in. And we're actively building up our team to have the capacity to plan, design these programs, oversee operations, process the data, analyze it, and provide companies with the feedback they need to ensure that they're putting the carbon into the right pore space and it is remaining there, not over hundreds of years, but we need it to remain there for thousands of years. What worries me is there's dozens of projects in development right now, but to reach our net zero goals, we need thousands.
So to give you a little bit of so my company, Canadian Natural Resources, today captures 2.7 megatons of CO2 a year already, and have been doing that. So our Horizon project has been operational since 2017. We are 70% owners of ShellQuest, which of course has been operating now for better part of 12 to 15 years. and the Northwest Redwater, which is a capture as well, a carbon trunk line and enhanced oil recovery, and it's carbon capture on more than one facility, so others feed in. So from an agricultural component, feed in and go to in enhanced oil. We also have a gas plant, again, a small one that is to enhanced oil recovery, carbon capture. 3 of those facilities are on hydrogen plants. Of course, that's the easy to go one that we all know well, and that is the standard technology, obviously. But what's exciting, what Catherine is talking about, is the next generation of carbon capture technologies. So what are we doing with the ones that we know right now? Pathways will develop 10 to 12, potentially 14 carbon capture facilities from Fort McMurray region, coming through, which is the mining sector, coming through the in situ below ground sector, down into the Cold Lake region, into one of the hubs that the Alberta government has given us permission for the next phase of development. And so this is a component. There are many sectors that are doing this in Alberta, but I can talk to you about ours. And in those 12 to 14 capture facilities, a number of them will be on flue gas, which of course is the next generation. And so a number of them on hydrogen facilities, and if you're not familiar with that, that's blue hydrogen. So we know how to do this. And those facilities have been in operation for many years. So we have the very known component of CCUS that we're going to, and we have the next generation with flue gas. But then we also have in line across this R&D that you hear is the next generation again for carbon capture, conversion, utilization, all of those aspects. So it is a really integral part. But Pathways has committed to 10 megatons of the 22 by 2030 will come from carbon capture and storage.
Thank you all. I'm glad I asked.
My name is Jennifer Davis. I'm Director of Science and Innovation at Stratos, an ERM Group company. Drew, we do a lot of work with NRCan and the granting program. So I've got a bit of a government innovation question. We talk a lot to proponents, deal a lot in strategy, stakeholder engagement, and there's 3 kind of big barriers that we keep hearing a lot. One is the complexity of the application processes, well known. 2 is the rules around where government can play and what they can get funded for from private companies, which can limit collaboration opportunities. And the 3rd is the IP management rules of the federal government. And I just think as we're really needing to up the pace of innovation and deal with multi and interdisciplinary collaboration, that some of these barriers may need to be reconsidered. So my question specifically is, are you aware of any conversations at the federal system level to deal with some of these structural barriers that are kind of slowing the pace of collaboration and innovation?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is something we are looking at. As you said, we want to. There's a balance that we're trying to maintain, right? We want to make sure that we can show results for the taxpayer dollars that we're spending in this space. So there is a kind of accountability side of things that come with public funding that is different than it might be in the private sector. Having said that, some of the steps we are taking, I mentioned the Clean Growth Hub, which is, I think, providing, at least for new entrants, a bit of a pathfinder service to get into the federal government, because it can be Byzantine. I realize that if you don't deal with them on an everyday basis and don't spend millions of dollars on government relations expertise. We're trying to do things like, if someone applies to a program in one department, that they don't have to duplicate all their efforts to apply to a similar process, a similar but different process elsewhere. And as I mentioned earlier, handing off projects to the right destination whenever we can. On the rules on who can do what, I think you are finding, with this government in particular, they have put a major emphasis on, I would say, broader programming so that it is not too boutique. And the Net Zero Accelerator at SIF is a good example of that. that it has a very broad mandate and a number of different projects can come to it. That comes with its own challenges, of course, too, which it's harder for specialized projects to get the attention if they're competing against a very broad swath of things. On IP management, on that side, I think you will find a lot of federal governments, as part of that accountability, transparency, do require that the projects show what they achieved. And even if you look at the CCUS tax credit that's coming in, we've actually baked a requirement that projects over a certain size do have to share some of their homework, which has
been done already.
Yeah, which is typically being done, but it's not universal, actually. Yeah. There are some parts of the sectors that are more active in that space proactively. But as I said, climate change is everybody's business. The fact that we're going to have more and more entrants means the onus on us as a federal government to work better together, to avoid duplication, stepping on each other's toes, and confusing, frankly, the kind of clients and shareholders or stakeholders that engage with us is a really big part of our focus of our program for the next few years.
I can speak to the IP side as a small company as well. So we are being provided additional assistance from some of the federal agencies on developing IP strategies, tracking IP. And as part of receiving funding from CRIN, we do need to detail all the IP we're creating throughout the project. And we need to be able to provide the technology for access to whoever wants to use it, but maintain ownership of the IP.
Please.
Hi, everyone. Sami Khan, Assistant Professor at Simon Fraser University. Our research interests are in materials and processes for carbon capture, so very relevant to the previous question. So my question is, as carbon capture technologies are growing, as sort of like some pushback that is received as it should not be construed as a way to continue emitting while you can capture it. Rather, the focus should be on reducing the emissions. So I'm wondering, for the oil and gas industry in particular, we need the oil and gas industry to make these molecules for polymers and other societal needs that we still have. So what areas of policy and regulation should be focused on to continue producing these chemicals while also having carbon capture as a way to stop the emissions from growing, but not to enhance the existing throughput as a sort of a golden ticket to do that because carbon capture is available?
I can start. I'll
okay, great. Just putting my federal hat on here, a few things. With the investment tax credit that we brought in for CCUS, one of the limitations of it is actually that it can't go towards enhanced oil recovery. So it is meant to tackle the emissions, the real world emissions that are happening through production that's happening anyways. It's not going to be used to bring out more barrels. I will acknowledge, as every engineer and scientist in the room will attest, is that EOR barrels actually are lower intensity, but it does address that point around producing more as a result of CCUS. I think one of the most important things we're trying to do through the drafting of the CCUS and carbon management strategy is acknowledge that while oil and gas has been a crucial part of the history of CCUS, its first 50 years, if you go back to the first EOR projects in 1972, it was largely built around oil and gas. But if we forecast forward where CCUS will be and will need to be used in 2050, oil and gas may be a relatively small part, actually, of where CCUS is being deployed, because it's going to be used in multiple sectors: cement, steel, and applications we haven't even thought of yet. And we haven't really even got into the carbon removal side of the equation, which is linked to CCUS. Direct air capture, backspikers, all these other areas that have kind of offshoots from what we're learning in CCUS are a crucial part of the reason why we need to make the investment for today's emissions so that we can also address the emissions of the future. And then I'll just say in closing, it's CCUS right? It's not just CCUS. There's no silver bullet. There are silver buckshot, you hear people say sometimes. But the federal government is also doing a lot of things on the other side of the emissions too, right? We've put in an ICE standard. By 2035, you're not going to have passenger vehicles that are using gasoline in the same way. We're looking at the role that unabated natural gas might play in the power grid. post 2035. We're looking at the future of fossil fuels in heating. So in addition to tackling the production side emissions that CCUS will help with, and also in things like gas-fired power, possibly, we're also looking at the end use too. So it is not just CCUS and nothing else.
So, I mean, that's why, CRIN is focused, and Canada's a global leader in clean hydrocarbons from source to end use. And the really neat thing about net zero is that we're all going there. And so there will be no scope 3 emissions. I think we need to start talking about that. It's really critical. And so remember I said by the reductions by 2030 commitment for us at 22 megatons, that just for oil sands, 10 is CCUS. The others are many other things that don't produce greenhouse gases in the first place, right? So it's off greenhouse gases, not oil and gas. We need it's a very dense energy source, and we need energy systems. And so I think, especially in this room, that's well understood. And so we need to make sure that we are providing Canadians with secure energy supply. And like you said, also, look around. Everything around us is made out of petrochemicals, right? And in some form or another, that aspect is there. And I want you to know that we are also developing many technologies that don't combust and are useful. Graphene, all of these other components, so separating the carbon from the hydrogen, and all of this at net zero, which is really, that's so important when everybody needs to get to net zero.
Larkin Moscrop, hi, thank you. You transitioned perfectly to what I was going to ask. What do you think oil and gas's responsibility is globally? So in Canada and production of oil and gas, what do you think our social responsibility is for helping developing countries as well as developing clean tech in other developing countries?
So certainly from a clean tech point of view, we work with the Canadian, the Trade Commission, and they are amplifying we actually have an oil and gas 101 for their 200 and some trade commissioners around the world. We meet quite frequently. And we are trying to make sure that our Canadian entrepreneurs and our solutions are being used by others. What's really cool about Canada too, this is more of a personal component here, is when you look across Canada and you have to get to net zero as a country, we have such diverse forms of energy, and just each locale has its own assets, that there isn't, I don't think, an energy system that we're not going to create that can't be modeled or used someplace else. And some of those will include fossil fuels at net zero, and some of them won't. And that's okay. But the really cool thing is we will do it. And, so yes, we want that abated, right? That abated. That's a word that I get no joy. You can't use that word. Like, people don't understand it. This room does. So it's really important that we're talking about abated production and abated use.
I just want to add to that.
Please.
One of the things that we can export, and this is really for Catherine and Andrew as well, because Andrea and Joy know about it, is the collaboration that's been put together. Andrea's put 5 oil companies together in order to work on what is competitive intelligence, what is going to make money. I challenge that in Ontario, are there car manufacturers and the part manufacturers, are they collaborating on that level? Do we see Microsoft and Apple collaborate on that level? We as Canadians, we can collaborate. We can understand, what the important drivers are here, get over the competition piece of it, get the answer, and then get back to competition. I think we can teach the world a great deal about that.
Thank you.
If I may, I come from a pretty, let's say, I come from Quebec. Just going to summarize that as this is, we've produced some of the most, intense militant or what was it? What's the word though? Sorry, same way. So, and I'm always surprised. I think there's a lot of education to be done because we all know that everything's made of, products made of hydrocarbons around us, but that is always, I find it always surprising that people are not aware of that. So I think that's something we need to keep on repeating. I think we also need to, come up with some information as to what innovation really looks like in Canada, and don't focus on shiny objects, right? I like to build on things where we're good at. I think that's one of the things we should be looking at, because if we have some, intelligence in one specific sector, might as well, and we have some industrial players, we definitely need those guys to keep on building on that. Because what we need is a number of champions. And that's not going to come up tomorrow morning. It's years and years of hard work. And, electrification is super important, but I don't think we'll be electrifying the rug any day soon. I think those things we need, and there's literally a discussion that needs to happen with citizens. So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to say is collaboration is happening at some level. None of the companies we invest in have a local market. Canada is not a market for us. We will invest in companies that have at least $1 billion market. So, definitely looking at deals that will be expanding all across the world.
Maybe just to the specific point around tech transfer, what obligation do we have as Canadians to help the rest of the world work through some of these problems? I'll just say that, just in my own world, we're part of organizations like Mission Innovation that are bringing together the Global North and Global South to tackle the RD&D challenges facing the energy sector. One of those missions is in carbon removal. We're working with the US and Saudi actually on that one. And the learnings from these efforts do get shared across countries that may not have the capacity themselves to do that same work. The International Energy Agency, of course, also has similar functions. We bring together under technology TCPs, technology cooperation programs. They are largely OECD countries that are putting in the R&D work, but the learnings are shared universally. And then the other thing I would say is that there is, through the climate finance mechanism, an opportunity to do work in this space too. And so I know that even just some of my own scientists have done work in Colombia, Mexico, and other places, looking at how methane MRV work can be applied in those settings in places where the capacity isn't the same as Canada has. And I know industry itself too also engages. There's the OGCI that a number of Canadian companies have worked with over the years to try and get some of those governance and expertise exported to countries that may not have it themselves.
As a small company, we are actively looking for opportunities in other places around the world. And we've presented some of our early results at some international conferences. And there's a great deal of interest in it, because not only are we reducing the land footprint and maintaining the same images in the subsurface, but in some cases we start to reduce the cost of acquiring this data too, and that generates tremendous interest from companies around the world.
So just in the whole thing, there you are. I was just going to, so take it away, my friend.
Oh, absolutely. Hi, Joy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the great panel. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Global Advantage Consulting Group, Omar Kaya. And one of the things that I'm curious about, as it also came up in this discussion, is interconnections between different stakeholder groups. So when we look at levels of governments, higher education sector, universities, colleges, networks, and not-for-profits, associations, private sector, all streams, technology suppliers, and then domestic and global market opportunities. So that's very important to make sure that these connections are strong between across the ecosystem. So my question for the panel is, where do you see the biggest opportunities to strengthen these connections between different stakeholder groups?
You guys can go whatever order you wish.
I can speak about connections between small businesses. So these technology competitions that CRIN has put forward, there are a lot of different technologies to solve similar problems. And we've begun collaborating with other companies that have complementary technologies, or even working together with companies that have competing technologies, as we all want to get to net zero. So I think that by creating a network like CRIN, it's enabling us to see what other technologies are out there at a similar level of development, and then work with these companies towards a broader solution rather than just an individual solution.
A lot of my comments have gone around how the increasing complexity of multiple players being involved is a challenge, but also an opportunity. What I would say is that you are seeing in the energy RD&D space over the last decade a pivot towards what we're calling mission-based innovation. And implied in that name is that you identify a relatively clear target that you need to get to, and that every player, I suppose it has a military analogy, but like your Air Force, your Navy, your Marines, they all know that although they may be doing different things, they're going towards that mission destination. And I do think that bringing that philosophy of a mission-based approach, it's built into CRIN, of course. It's built into an increasing number of things you see coming from innovation funding programs, so that you're not just saying, we're going to use this type of instrument always, always, always. We're trying things like prize-based challenges, other novel forms of getting money out the door, but you can do that when you know what your mission is, because you don't have to build all of your tools to do, a subset of one thing if you know they're going in the right direction.
I guess we're more aware of where the challenges are with the people you're dealing with. So we're not, as a VC, dealing a lot with the R&D sector in universities. So obviously that's something that I'm not super aware of. But what I know is, working with industrials, what I've seen in the past 8 years, I've been working at Cycle, is there's a lot of corporate VCs coming up. None of them are in Canada. Having industrial to commit to investing in innovation, that's somehow something like other foreign industrial players have seen relevant, but in Canada we're lagging behind on that front, and I don't think that's helping, because that's exactly where, in the energy space, if there's one space where we should be quite good at, given the size of those companies, is investing in innovation. And that's a good segue to getting exposed at what's coming, and not being too risky about it at the same time, because you get to invest with other investors in the room. So that's something I think Canada should be look at and see how we can support on that front. Open innovation as well. So we're seeing that a lot elsewhere. We're seeing a lot of industrial developing challenges and dealing with accelerators and incubators. That is something we also need, I think, to be exposed. Like, without knowing what it means, you don't intend to use that type of acceleration process. And so that those are two fast-moving areas where we can bring innovation at speed.
So I don't know if you've noticed, and I know you can read every word on that thing that's on the screen there. If you've been with CRIN for a while, this is a version 2.0 of this. Global Advantage helped us develop the first one, and are the authors of this one as well. This is the Canadian oil and gas innovation ecosystem. Now, they are in Princess, it's, I think, room in the back left-hand corner. And so please go there. We actually just brought this to COP, CRIN was at CROP, and we presented on this because it's super important to somebody who wants to understand how to navigate the Canadian oil and gas innovation ecosystem. What's super exciting about this one is it's interactive. And if you are a CRIN member, you will be able to access this early in the new year. And so where I'm not going to do a full, but in each and every one of those represents every single sector. So if you want government funding, for example, you will be able to go in, pull up government funding, and see the list of all the current government funding for your group. If you want to find the industry producers, we're all listed in there. It's the StatsCan's numbers are behind a bunch of things that are in here. Plus, it's just a mishmash of multiple databases and all brought into one place, which is the utility of this is phenomenal. We're super excited. CRIN's about creating the tools. Remember, it's about the place where you go to get work done and find who you need to get stuff done. And so this is one of our major tools in that. Now, if you go and play in it, remember it's birthing, and you find something that isn't correct, let us know. If you go and you look in and you're supposed to be there and you're not there, let us know and we'll get you in there. So again, this is about community coming together to create and drive this change. We don't pretend to be perfect in any way, but we're sure trying hard. And we'd like you to come and try hard with us. I don't know if we've got time for an additional question, if I'm going to get kicked out of here. If you've got, I know we're really pushing it for lunch, but are you guys okay if we do one more, or how are you at? I see a bunch of people just almost like ready to dash, but no, you got a bunch of nods, so please go.
Yeah, I guess so. Okay, so I'm Gavin Douglas, postdoc at McGill, member of Science Policy Exchange. So I was just asking, I guess I'll just keep it really short. So you talked about a bunch of policy issues of implementing carbon capture, expanding it. I'm still a little confused about like so there's government investing that's making it easier to do that. Do you think that's going to be the main, that will make a big difference? Or are there other policy initiatives that you'd like to see to really help grow carbon capture? Is there anything in particular that you'd like to see or that needs to be?
We need to be competitive, regardless of where it fits with what's going on in the globe. Had the privilege of at a round table with Minister Wilkinson yesterday, and if we're not competitive, it won't happen here. Period.
I think what an investor is scared of is public policy. It's just, that's true. It's what we want is previsibility. That sometimes doesn't stick too much. So what we like is a market. And so that is one component of that, but it also means like who's adopting it and how strong is the technology, is the IP protected, is the team strong enough, is like there's a number of things we look at, but sometimes it just relies on public policy. It's quite scary. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time. And join CRIN, please.